तावदेशा ध्रुवं ध्रुवा। महदिदं प्रमोदस्थानं यत् भारतस्य प्रतिष्ठायाः प्रतीकरूपस्य स्वामी विवेकानन्दस्य जयन्ती महोत्सवावसरे पुनः भारतस्य विद्यास्थानानां प्रतिष्ठां स्वपरिश्रमैः वर्धयन् श्रीमान् राजीव मल्होत्रा महोदयः विशिष्टव्याख्यानाय अस्माभिः समाहूतः अत्र समायात इति तस्य अन्येषाञ्च विदुषां स्वागतं व्याहर्तुम् अत्र उपस्थितोऽस्मि। स्वस्य नैकैः ग्रन्थैः ब्रेकिंग इंडिया इत्यादिभिः ग्रन्थैः विद्वद्वलये सुपरिचितः एषः विद्वान् अद्यत्वे बैटल फॉर संस्कृत संस्कृताय आहवम् इति ग्रन्थं विरचय्य तद्विचाराणां प्रचारनिमित्तं भारतयात्रां विदधाति। अधिकन्तु एतस्मिन् विषये वक्ति आचार्यः कण्णन् महोदयः। कर्नाटकसंस्कृतविश्वविद्यालयस्य आह्वानम् अङ्गीकृत्य समागतवते श्रीमते मल्होत्रा महोदयाय विश्वविद्यालयपक्षतः मत्पक्षतश्च स्वागतं व्याहरामि। अस्मत्कुलपतिं प्रार्थये सम्माननं विदधातु। भारत संस्कृतेः अयमेकः भावः भावप्रकटनम् आदरप्रकटनम् आदौ एव क्रियते फलपुष्पप्रदानैः। अथ वेदिकायां विराजमानाम् अस्मत्कुलपतिं प्रोफेसर् पद्माशेखर महोदयां अन्यांश्च सहकर्मिणः कार्यक्रमस्य समायोजकं डाक्टर् मोहन महोदयं, डाक्टर् कण्णन्, प्रोफेसर आर्यन अय्यंगार, स्वामीजी सानंद स्वामी महाराज एवंच अन्ये च विद्वांसः अस्मद् आह्वानम् अङ्गीकृत्य अत्र समायाताः तान् सर्वान् अपि विदुषः स्वागतवचनैः सभाजयामि।
So I am the symbol of what the problem is, me. Yeah. Reason being, I'm speaking to you in English about Sanskrit. The study of Mandarin is done in Mandarin, not English. The study of Arabic is done in Arabic. The study of Persian is done in Persian. The study of French is done in French. The study of Russian is done in Russian. Among the old languages and old civilizations, ours is the only one which is studied from the outside, not from the inside. Only one. So first I will knock myself down. Then I'll tell you why what I'm doing is important. So, because of the history, our studies have been controlled by outsiders. So, rather than becoming producers of knowledge of Indology, we've become consumers and others became producers. So they control the machinery, the mechanisms of knowledge production, the universities, the prestigious journals, the conferences, all of that. And our people are dying to go there and get invited. And the person who's been invited comes back, everybody thinks he's more special. So it's that sort of thing. So, since the ideas that have been developed in Western Indology have, it's not 5 years, 10 years or 20 years, for the last 50 years, 100 years, they've been entering Indian thought more and more, including what they teach in history departments about ancient Indian history. what they teach in humanities in general is from somewhere else. It's not our own research. And the Indian left and Indian Marxists also imported philosophy. Marxism is not native. And then level 2 Marxism, level 3 Marxism, level 4 Marxism, all of them are from the overseas. So we have just become obedient, listening to people we think are superior, learning from them, repackaging and distributing it here. So the 99% of the work in Indology, which is being published in international journals, is in English. Hardly a little bit somewhere here and there. So this is the problem as far as blaming others is concerned. Now we got to blame ourselves. How many of you have done Purva Paksh of major Western Indologists? Tell me, show me hands. Okay, very honest, not a single hand. And this is one of the prestigious, I'm happy to hear, and I want to know more about what you've done. One person, I'm happy to know. Two, good. I want to know more about it. When I started this project, I invited Kannan, his wife Meera, to help. I invited people in Delhi University, Sanskrit department, they gave me the references to. Hired people also. But when I gave them what they had to read and understand and discuss with me, after 1 week, some of them came back and said, we can't understand it. Some of them came back in a month. Some of them came back in 3 months. Kannan was one of the most honest persons. Some of these people continued producing a lot of garbage. Did not understand, and just produced garbage. Kannan was very honest in saying, after spending so many days and weeks, I've only gone through the first 20 pages out of 600-page book. And it is not possible to do justice and really understand it unless I get all the reference works he's quoting. The idiom is very heavy, it's not just English. The idiom he uses, and he refers to other Western thinkers we never heard of. So we have to now read those people. So it is very difficult for our people to do proper Purva Paksha. I'm not talking about bombastic, they are bad and they are this and they are that, because lot of our critique of the West is just opinion. Most of these people writing critiques of Wendy Doniger, it's all opinion. They haven't even properly read it. They keep accusing her of being a missionary, but she's a Jew, she's not even a Christian. So it is insulting some ways. There are people, level of scholarship is so low. So part of it is language deficiency our people have. Part of it is just hard work and rigor. Lot of the reason not doing Purva Paksha is also because we can't face it. We don't have the courage, we don't have the psychological strength, we don't have the demeanor to do this Purva Paksha. And we keep giving excuses, so what, how does it matter? So when somebody asks me, how does it matter? I tell them that without European Indology, there would have been no Aryan theory, Aryan invasion theory, because such a theory did not exist until 200 years ago. In traditional texts, we don't see such a theory. We do not see a Dravidian identity fighting Aryan identity. We don't see that in our traditions. So obviously a problem we are living with was created. It's a product of Indology. Nobody from our side gave a response to Max Miller. So it became normal. And now everybody accepts it. That's an example of a problem. The caste system, we had Varna Jati, had its own issues. But this idea of solidifying Varna Jati, collapsing it into hierarchical, fixing caste system, is a product of Western thought. Then I could go on and tell you so many things we are doing today, and we accept, are not Indian tradition. So what people think of you does matter. You can't just say it doesn't matter. Our habit is a kind of a lazy habit that it doesn't matter. So my role for in this work is not to try and do what you people do already, because you are so much better than me. There's no way I can be as good as you. You know something that's very important. But I have been immersed in Western culture, thought, history, philosophy, scholarship for 40 plus years, since 1971, 45 years. So I'm immersed, I'm very confident. I spend much of my time engaging, having arguments, debates with people. So I'm extremely clear about my understanding. So I bring something which is different than what you have access to. And even if you go for 6 months, 1 year, 5 years to the West, you're so much in awe, so afraid to speak out. And even if you try to speak out, you don't know how to make the impact. It is not so easy. So I can open some doors and windows and give you an insight into what are some issues with Western Indology. I can do the Purva Paksha because I can read them very carefully. I understand Western philosophy. I understand when they say Vico says, based on Vico, this is the idea of Paramarthika and Vyavharika. I know Vico thought. Most Sanskrit people here don't ever heard of such a man. When they say Benjamin's theory of aestheticization of power and how it explains the history of Sanskrit, most Indian traditional people don't know what is going on. What is this aestheticization of power? It's a very sophisticated theory. So I know Benjamin, I know his aestheticization of power. I can understand what they're saying. I may or may not be able to do Uttar Paksh. You have to do the Uttar Paksh. I can tell you, I can put the light and say, this is an issue, that's an issue, this is a problem. Now you have to help me give a response. That is how we can work together. Because I understand them better than most Sanskrit scholars do. You understand what the real answer should be. This is why I'm here. This is why I wrote this book. I wrote this book not to change the other side, but to change our people and wake them up. You cannot change that, they got very good players and our batsmen cannot respond. We cannot tell them, "Arey, dheere karo, don't ball so fast." But we can train our people to rise up to higher standard. So our traditional scholars have to begin to take more interest in Purva Paksh of Indology. Because if you are in the field of pharmaceuticals, you must know what is happening in the industry. What are other people doing? If you are an airline, you must know what is the competition. If you are in IT, you have to know what is the competition. So if you are in Sanskrit studies and Indology, study of Sanskrit texts and all these things, you cannot say, I don't care what other people are doing. It is your job. Our Purva Paksh tradition requires you to do Purva Paksh of leading thinkers on the same subject. So why is it that when we do Purva Paksh, we only do Purva Paksh of Buddhists and Purva Mimamsa and these kind of people? We don't do Purva Paksh of Christianity, Islam, Marxism, postmodernism, feminism, all the latest current things that we are dealing with. We are not having problems with Buddhists anymore. We are not having those kind of problems. We are having problems with certain ideologies, and we have not done Purva Paksh of that. So, and we have stopped doing this Purva Paksh long time ago. In yesterday's lecture, I gave a lot of reasons why Purva Paksh stopped. I won't repeat all that. We'll put it on YouTube. So, if you want to read my books, the purpose is not that you're going to learn Sanskrit. The purpose is not of my books to teach you how Sanskrit is great and we are the greatest and all that. I am not interested in that. I am only giving you a Purva Paksh of the most important Indologists with power, funding, influence, Padam Shris and Padam Bhushans that Indian government gives. Lot of PhDs they produce in Ivy Leagues who come and get top jobs here. Funding, huge amount of funding from all kind of people, including Narayan Murthy's foundation, millions of dollars helping them to do this kind of work. So the Purva Paksh of these people will tell you what is right and what is wrong. It's not that everything is wrong. They're doing good work also. But you must be very sharp in picking out what are the issues and give answers. And I don't agree that they're bad motives and all. I don't agree with that. I want to give them the respect that they are doing what they genuinely believe. What they genuinely believe. So, who are the leftists and Marxists and atheists today in the Indology? They're controlling the Indology. How do we think of them? How should we think of them? And in this book I propose, we should think of them as the new Charvaks. It's the Charvaks who've come back. The old Charvaks dismissed the Vedic Praman, they dismissed Shruti, they were dismissive of that, but they were good scholars. They knew the Sanskrit well. They had different metaphysical ideas. These people also are atheists. They reject Vedas, they reject the Paramarthika, the whole sacredness, transcendence, they reject. But they are good scholars. And they are more dangerous than the old Charvaks because they got a lot of money, a lot of funding. Previous Charvaks were not like that. They were humble people. And today's Charvaks, the new Charvak 2.0, they are not Indians mainly. That is another difference from the old Charvaks. At least there were people living here. They were not working for some foreign establishment. But today these people are working for a foreign funding, foreign governments, foreign ideology. So they are outsiders of our tradition, but they are insiders of a different civilization. So they are not neutral. They are outsiders of our tradition, but not in the sky, floating nowhere. They are insiders to a foreign foreign civilization which has its own agendas. So I don't think that you can blame them for bad intentions. I think you can say that they come with a different ideological baggage, and based on that ideological baggage, they're doing the best they can. In fact, I have a lot of respect for them. My problem is not with them, but my problem is with our own people who have not given a response. So my call to action is not on Western Indologists and asking them to stop doing what they're doing. My call to action is that the traditional Sanskrit scholar, the Indian expert, must wake up, get out of their silo and their cocoon and begin to understand what is going on. Because I found none of the scholars I talked to able, willing, competent to be able to read this very detailed scholarship of the West. So I decided to write this 500-page book myself, to basically give a very simple insight into what they are saying. Very simple, trying to simplify it as much as I can. So now what I will do is I will give you because time is limited, and I want to excite you to read the book. So my job is to give you little examples. So I'll give you what are some of the main problems in Western Indology on which I am doing Purva Paksh in this book. First is, based on an Italian 17th century philosopher named Vico, V-I-C-O. The argument has been made and given a lot of value by the Indologists that Paramarthika and Vyavaharika are not both worth studying. Vyavaharika is practical, it brings progress, materialistic, it can change your history. So they have bifurcated our tradition, which a good Vedantin or a Vedic scholar would not accept. And this is a major foundation of this Indology that I am explaining. I have a whole chapter on how dismissing the transcendence, the sacredness, which is sort of like making the whole tradition atheistic, is a very dangerous thing for us. And that is very central in the work they are doing. The second thing they are doing is, so in this area of secularizing the Vedas, secularizing Sanskrit also, they are dismissive of mantras, for meditation, because that's something that is linked with Paramarthika. They are very dismissive of yagna, of very philosophical, metaphysical discourse, because they feel that that's all rubbish, and so on. In this respect, they resemble the Charvaks, in this respect, in many ways. Next, they dismiss the oral tradition as being valid as being a valid part of history. A very clear statement is made that history begins with writing. When there is writing, history starts. Now, a better statement would be that there was always history, we don't know about it because it was not written down. But they are not saying that. They are saying that the historical process of development, change, evolution cannot happen with oral traditions. Only when things are written down, then society can change. I don't think it's that simple. And they also put the date of writing as 200 years after Buddha. So there was no writing in India, and writing was brought by the Buddhists. They wanted to write. The Vedic Brahmins were not interested in writing because they wanted to keep it secret from other people. They were very secret. They wanted a monopoly to oppress other people, have power, so they kept it secret by just talking verbally and never writing it. And the Buddhists, according to them, were revolting against the Vedas, which is also not true. So they keep dividing Buddhist Vedic as much as they can. Maximum divide they try to create. And the Buddhists, in order to break down the Vedic power, started writing things so everybody could read. Democracy of knowledge. And so the Brahmins, being now they had to catch up. So they also started writing. So Brahmins started writing to copy the Buddhists who were writing. And the Buddhists were writing to break down the Brahmin monopoly. This is the language theory that has come out. So with the beginning of writing is the beginning of history and the beginning of progress. So history starts, as far as they are concerned, very recently, according to their dates. Now this is a big serious problem. How can Indologists just sit there and do nothing? I mean, you have to go and see that when was grammar, but much older than the dates they give. So many texts, so much older. And progress also. It's not that something was fixed and frozen until Buddhists came and challenged it. Even before Buddhists, things were evolving. Grammar was evolving. So this business of being frozen in a kind of state of primitiveness is not something I would accept. A very large part of their critique is that Shastras lack creativity and innovation, because Shastras are metaphysically stuck with Vedic metaphysics. And since Shastra is based on Vedic metaphysics, which cannot change, so Shastra basically can repeat the same thing, and different Shastras are recycling and fine-tuning the same knowledge, but they really cannot break out and do something innovative. This also is too drastic a statement, a very rash statement. And this has been the view of dominant Western Indologists since the 1980s. A very important paper I've cited in Indology in the 1980s, published in a very prestigious journal, made this argument about Shastras. And then Shastras are considered abusive because they codify oppression, social oppression. Social oppression by the Brahmins against Shudras and women and all of that. Now, I learn a lot by studying others. I respect them and I learn a lot. And I say hats off to them because some of the things they come up with are very interesting, very imaginative. So this theory, probably the most interesting thing I learned is something called the aestheticization of power, which I won't get into the whole couple of chapters in my book. I've explained very simply what it means. But basically it says that there is a style of power which is not physical brute force violence, but very smooth. बहुत प्यार से बात करेगा कोई, बहुत अच्छी तरह से बात करेगा. Sam, Dan. But beneath is Bhed Dand. The Sam, Dan is very nice and aesthetic. pleasing. So this dance and this drama and is all part of aesthetics. But the story and the message being given is king is powerful, Brahmin is powerful. All these messages are being communicated in a very aesthetic way. So this aestheticization of power is the trick that Sanskrit was very good at. That's why Sanskrit was spreading all over, because it could be used as a weapon to do this aestheticization of power and give the kings control over the people so they could dominate and oppress them. It's a very interesting theory. This theory was developed in Frankfurt. There's a school of Marxism called the Frankfurt School of Marxism. When the Nazis took over power in Germany, the Marxists were feeling that their theory has failed. Because according to Marxism, when there is an economic depression and the people are poor, they are supposed to overthrow the elite. This happened in Russia because of Lenin. Right? Because of Lenin, the peasants mobilized, overthrew the ruling elite. So when Germany had an economic depression, according to Marxism, the working class should have overthrown the ruling elite. But instead, Nazis came as their own new kind of ruling elite. Why did this happen? Marxists needed to answer. So Benjamin, who's one of the founding members of what's called the Frankfurt School of Marxism, he came up with this theory that the brilliance of the Nazis was that they came up with this drama, art, pageantry, parades to put pride in Germany. You know, we are Germans, we have pride. And this aestheticization of power, people forgot their hunger, people forgot their suffering, because they could give them the natak, they could be given the dance, they could be, so the Germans were so good at mesmerizing the people with arts and with very aesthetic show of we are doing well. Yeah, like North Korea does, keep all the people very mesmerized that we are doing very well. So they came up with this theory that language, culture, arts can be used for power by doing things in a very aesthetic way. So people will not revolt. People will think they're okay, and these guys are big shots, they're rulers, they are kings, they're gods, and they're very nice people. So how you project like a public relations, PR. So according to them, the PR use of arts and humanities is how one can keep power and prevent a communist overthrow, revolutionary overthrow. Now, Sheldon Pollock took this theory and applied it to Sanskrit. So he says, history of Sanskrit, rise of Sanskrit, without military, without weapons, without force. How did it expand? Why did all these kings accept it? Why did they keep inviting Brahmins to perform various yagnas? And why did they sponsor Ramayana? Why? It's because the king could project himself in a very aesthetic way and keep his domination and power and prevent progress, prevent social progress, so the public would not revolt and throw him out. So India and Southeast Asia all stayed backward because Sanskrit was a weapon to be used, which could be used for aestheticization of power. You understand? So Sanskrit is a weapon of mass destruction. WMD. That's my phrase for what he's writing. It's not he says it. But he says very clearly that Sanskrit is the best tool, the best language in the world for doing this kind of a job, or where you can just make people so happy. Night after night performances, everybody feeling so thrilled that they're lost, they don't understand their real life is suffering and they have to overthrow the king, but they don't care to do that because they're so proud. So this capability is because of the poetic power of Sanskrit. This is why in front of Indian audiences, they come and make you very proud, because Sheldon Pollock says Sanskrit is the best language in the world. All of you clap. Yeah? So Sanskrit is so beautiful. All of you clap. So after describing his aestheticization of power, I have a section in which I say, you are aestheticizing your power to us. And he says, the aestheticization of power in Sanskrit is a conspiracy between the Brahmin who does his job and the king who funds him. The king keeps the Brahmin in business, sponsoring it. And the Brahmin is always writing prashastis, making the king look, wah, 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 great. And this collaboration produces this aesthetic stuff out of, kavya. The whole purpose of kavya, he says, is politics. Kavya is politics. He removed already the sacred by removing the paramarthika. That is done already. Now he says, so if there is no sacred, why are they doing it? They're doing it because it's politically powerful. So I say that he, like the new Brahmin of English, is being funded by Murthy, the new Raja. So this is good collaboration for them. Because Murthy gets power, he goes and cuts business deals everywhere, and he provides the prashasti that he provides. He's written a prashasti about the Murthy family, and I've quoted it. That this is his prashasti for his sponsor. So he is actually doing. So I'm saying your theory is so brilliant, I'm just going to apply it to explain what you're doing. So I'm not angry. No rudeness in this book. Kannanji, is that correct? In fact, I'm constantly praising him. I'm just saying that I'm taking a theory and making it even more important. So, I should stop, but I'll just quickly make a list. A huge theory has been developed on the relationship between Sanskrit and Indian languages, where Sanskrit is hegemonic. It dominates, it invades the other languages. It's not harmonious. And because Sanskrit, according to them, is an Aryan language, it's come from other place, and these local languages are from here, the vernaculars. So there is that asymmetry of power between Sanskrit and which is very politically mischievous, I think. I think there is some. Then Ramayana, a lot of work on Ramayana. What Ramayana is, what purpose it served politically in the history of India. So the most amazing claim is that Ramayana was not popular until 12th century when the Turks invaded. And the Hindu kings needed a story to unify them against the foreign invaders. Ramayana became the narrative to project Rakshasa idea upon Muslims. So 1,000 years ago, since 1,000 years, Ramayana has served the purpose of anti-Muslim rabble-rousing. It has this potential that any time Hindus want, they can use Ramayana as a weapon and say, oh, those guys are Rakshasas. So he says that's why they have this Ayodhya, all this problem is nothing new. This is nothing new. This kind of anti-Muslim use of Ramayana is 1,000 years old. And so that is the primary role and function that Ramayana serves. So the reason all of you do Ramayana Katha and you go and celebrate, whatever all the festivals, because these powers want to keep that, it is like sleeper cells. All the people in Ramayana are ready to be woken up against the Muslims anytime required. This is a kind of a theory. And this is loud and clear in the book. I give plenty of evidence that this is exactly what they're trying to say. Then this whole business that Nazism arose using Sanskrit oppression as its role model. Sanskrit had already logic for oppressing other people, oppressing Shudras. So British Orientalism and colonialism got many of these racist ideas by studying Sanskrit. Because Sanskrit already had these ideas from before the Europeans thought of it. As if, Europeans were very nice people. Now, of course, the whole history of Europe is quite different. Even before colonization, they'd done all these racist things anyway. And there is no evidence that Nazism didn't have its own German racism built into it. So, blaming Sanskrit for the bad things that Europeans have done. This is another part of it. And then the death of Sanskrit, a very major thesis that Sanskrit died 1,000 years ago. It's a dead language. And it died because Hindu kings killed it. Hindu kings killed it. And Muslims tried to save it. But the Hindus would not go along with it. It's a very interesting bit of data given. Just One Muslim guy may have funded something, so he kind of make it into a big thing that he's funding a lot of Sanskrit. And one Hindu king may have been a bad fellow, so exaggerate that and say, okay, Hindu kings were irresponsible and whatnot. I also have problems with calling Sanskrit a classical language, because classical language means dead language. In Western thought, Greek and Latin are classical languages. They're not living languages. It's a dead civilization. That civilization is dead. We respect it as we respect ancestors. We put the picture of the dead person, we put a mala around, and we say we respect this. So Sanskrit is fit for that, like Greek and Latin. It's in a museum, and specially trained philologists study it. So I have a real problem with that. I feel that bringing Westerners whose primary training is Western classics and then using those methods to study Sanskrit is a bad idea, and they're teaching that to Indians, and Indians are being very happy learning all this latest stuff. You're better off seeing how the Chinese treat Mandarin as an old language but still alive and vibrant, how the Japanese treat their language, how the Iranians treat Persian, how the Arabs treat Arabic. There are plenty of Asian languages as a better role model for Sanskrit studies than adopting Western classics as a role model. So I could go on, and I guess that's what our discussion this afternoon will be. I will stop, and do we take questions? Just a few questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, people can pose their questions.
My question is simple. It is actually also linked to the yesterday's talk. You spoke of the old Kurukshetra and the new Kurukshetra, that is the European Orientalism and American Orientalism. And you proposed the Swadeshi Orientalism now, Swadeshi Indology. What roadmap do you envisage? One, to bring the insiders up to scratch, and two, to level the playing field.
So thank you. So I think the real challenge is bringing the insiders, the traditional scholars, the people who feel this is their dharma, this is their, they have shraddha for the tradition, they have sadhana going on in their life. They're living a certain Vedic life, many of them. How to take these traditional people up to international standard? Because the study of all the civilizations is being done all over the world. It's not only localized and separated, everybody's studying everybody. So that's part of globalization. So all these are globalized areas, and you have to become a khiladi, a player, really good at the global Kurukshetra. So our people are not able to do that unless they go to the West and get brainwashed and join their army as a sepoy. Then they are upgraded because they do coolie work. Most of these guys who go and come back, they're indoctrinated with a certain ideology. They cannot think for themselves. They don't have freedom. They'll constantly spend the whole life basically promoting that person that fed them. So that kind of, we have to create India-based centers of learning which are world-class. If we can do it for IT and export IT, if we can do it for pharmaceuticals, if we can do it for, automobile industry, all kind of things, why can't we create the world's best Indology here? I mean, this is what I don't understand. And why are the Indian philanthropists giving millions of dollars to set up the more Indology over there, taking their dominance, making it even worse? Rather than taking that money, it will produce more result here. So this is what we have to do. Is firstly, we can't attack the Indian funding people and tell them to stop, because that's the wrong thing to do. We have no right. They can do what they want with their money. But we can certainly critique them. That's what I do in this book. So what you can do is, first you should read this book. Then you should propagate some of these ideas, because I take on a famous Peetham here in Karnataka that wants to give away its international representation to Ivy Leagues. I take that on as a big issue. You have to help me voice these concerns. And the Indians who are government giving these guys all kind of awards and making them the most important people, our literary festivals year after year bringing them like the big shots, that they are the experts. So we have to stop this over glamorization. We have to simultaneously put funds and attract the brightest students, have career paths which have good compensation, where art civilization can be studied. See, in China, they give a lot of funding for Confucian thought. They have these Confucian institutes all over the world. In Japan, they give a lot of funding though to people who study their culture and their civilization. All the different nations in the world invest in their own grand narrative, their own sense of who they are. And here it is considered like second grade, third grade. Some people will go, you know. So we have to change this. This attitude has to change, and it is not just some few government people coming and doing symbolic good for Sanskrit and all. It is not that. You have to make it part of. You have to make Sanskrit, Indology, Sanskriti part of the study of medicine, mathematics, mind, mental health, where applications exist. So the study of Shastras, the study of mantra, the study of yagna, the study of these different traditions has to be brought into a modern scientific context to make it relevant. Once it is relevant, people will say, okay, we have to pursue a career in this. We are following the West's export of knowledge to us in this area. All the good things, they are taking and digesting them as their own, including the digestion of yoga and the digestion of all Ayurveda. So we are not doing this ourselves. That, I think, is what we have to do. That's what I wrote this book for, to try and encourage people to do.
Yeah, Professor Lakshmi Tatachar, who was director of Sanskrit Academy in Melkote.
So thank you very much for your wonderful thoughts. Recently, that is 2 months ago, we started an institution called GATE, which means Gautama Academy of Indian Intellectual Traditions, just to counter this activity of the Windy Doniger, etc. We have got specific agenda before that organization. The first and foremost agenda of that organization is to create human resources to counter the arguments of the West. Gautama Academy of Indian Intellectual Tradition, because we want to use the logic of the Gautama, that is Nyaya Darshana. That's one of the important things I want to mention. Number 2, in all our Shastras, we very clearly propose that it is Paramata Nirakarana Purvaka Swamata Vyavasthapana. So the first and foremost duty of every Sanskritist, every Darshanakara, is to counter the arguments of the Paramata. Here the Paramata is the Mata of the Western Indologists. So it is our bounden duty to counter those arguments. But to counter those arguments, we must first of all understand their arguments. Many times in the Shastras, when we are debating, we say, can you just narrate what I have stated? That means, have you understood my argument? So in that way, we have to understand the argument of the Westerners properly. For that, enormous amount of training is required, according to me. We must be well versed in our Shastras, and we must also be well versed in English, and we must be well versed in Western logic, and we must also know the different theories of the Westerners, particularly so-called Marxists and philosophers like Locke, Berkeley, etc., etc. Without studying Western philosophy, probably will not be able to counter it. So I must also understand their inductive logic. This is my view. So from that point of view, we started this organization where we can train human resources for this specific purposes only.
Very good.
But as you say, it is most difficult to get the funds.
Yeah. So,
because we have got enemies in our own lands, if I am right.
yeah, some of the biggest enemies are here only. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. And some of
I
the
have not completed.
some of the sadhus are Ravan dressed as sadhu.
Okay.
Lot of.
That's our problem, according to me. So most of the times what happens, they toe the lines of those Westerners and ultimately try to see that the organization is closed. Because if you don't have funds, nothing can be done. And another interesting thing is, probably when they understand, when many of the Sanskrit scholars, the so-called Sanskrit scholars available now, with due regards to them and also with apologies to them, I want to say, they are not like Professor Hiriyana and others, who are outstanding scholars, not only in Sanskrit, but also in the Shastras, and at the same time, they are also well versed in Western philosophy and Eastern philosophies perfectly. I am quoting the name of Dr. Hiranaya, M. Hiranaya, who was one of the outstanding scholars of India. So we must have a finishing school like that, as you said. Just like an IT company or IIT, we must have a finishing school. From that point of view, this gate was started. So we want to train people like that. They should be well versed in our Shastras first, and they should understand the Shastras also properly. They should not be very much influenced by the modern thinking. If they understand the modern thinking, and so many times I came across one particular person who is aged about 95 years and outstanding Sanskrit scholar. He says there is no use in understanding Navyanyaya system now because this Avachedaka Avachena has gone already. According to me, after the advent of computer science, this Avachedaka Avachena is most important. Because when you actually speak, nobody should pick holes in your statement. So in that way, your statement should be perfect. From that point of view, it is very good. So I don't want to elaborate. In this way, lot of things can be done. We have got a specific roadmap map for that. If people like you and so many other people support us, probably we can go ahead. Thank you very much.
So, I tell you, I'm very happy to learn about this gate. I would like to come and spend a few days there.
Thank you, sir.
And I would like to, but let me tell you what I want to do. I want to play the role of the Western Indologist and debate with you. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, that is the correct thing. I should be the Purva Pakshin. I will tell you, this is the theory of why Sanskrit spread. Now you tell me why, you give me an answer. I want to tell you that the Vedic obsession with Paramarthika and Yagna has kept India back, and getting rid of this whole spiritual and sacred dimension is necessary to advance, because this is the logic they're giving. So I want people not necessarily knowing a lot of Sanskrit, but understanding the philosophy of the text and being able to imaginatively apply that knowledge and give me a good answer. The better answer you give me, the more you can defeat me, the better my next book will be.
That's right. Thank you very much, sir. And one more point I want to mention.
And one more thing, sir. The next book should be a joint book.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
We'll
we
do
should
that.
we should bring best scholars
Yes.
of our tradition
Okay.
into the series of these discussions.
Yes.
Then we should take those answers and compile them into papers, have a collection of papers, and produce a volume.
Yes.
Once we have done that, that is what I'm calling the home team.
Okay.
The home team of intellectual Kshatriyas. Once we have produced these people who are very good at this, then we can invite those guys and say, come and we will have a proper debate.
Sir, our organization can provide a platform for the home team, number one. Number two, I want to mention one more thing. For the last 40 years, I have struggled to adopt some of the ideas of the Western science and utilize them. And my goal was bridging the gulf between the past and present for the future. That's what I was trying. So, as you said, many of the experimental methods which are devised by the Westerners are outstanding. But at the same time, when I go through our Shastras and when I go through them deeper and deeper, I find most of them are scientific, and we have to establish to the whole world all these ideas are highly scientific, and even in the scientific age, they cannot be demolished.
So may I step in and help Professor Varakedi here? Please limit your questions. Just about 5 people should come in the front. No, not you. What, if, why, where, how? If you could simple, direct questions, it will be nice.
So I'm basically interested in, what are the foundations we need to do in schooling so that we can develop these intellectual people in the long run, because what we have seen in the institutes is that by the time they're 12th pass out, they don't have the kind of foundations to really build on to really fight this. I want to know what could be done at that level.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest contributions that our traditional knowledge would bring is to the education system, and make students more imaginative, able to think for themselves, not just product of a kind of an industrialized education. We have an industrial factory-oriented product. And this is a big topic. But I'll tell you, there are people inspired by Sri Aurobindo, for example, who are producing new kinds of education systems that are worth looking at, that are more based on the Vedic model. So some experiments are going on, and you should look into that. There are, I mean, we can talk about it offline, but I've gone into that field also to see how traditional education can actually produce smarter kids.
My name is Bharat. Along with this academic narrative, we also need a very serious political narrative, something like Roger Scruton or somebody, Indian conservative political narrative. How do we, start this?
Good. That's a very good point. You see, in the US, you have a very strong left and a very strong right in terms of media and in terms of intellectual discourse and all of that. Here, I don't like to use the word left and right. I don't believe that I'm right wing or any of that. I have both wings, and I don't like to be amputated. I fly on both wings. But people call themselves left, so I call them left. So this is dominated by one side, and the political discourse of the other side, what I call dharmic side, does not exist. Political discourse of a sophisticated kind. It's a lot of opportunism, how to get votes, how to get in power, knock them down, charge them with some bad things, call them names. All that works short term. But I'm sorry to tell you, my experience with people who are sort of into the political mobilization of our point of view are shallow, right from the leaders down to the top. They need to get deeper education. They don't have think tanks. They don't have proper training academies. So we have a problem. You're absolutely right. The political discourse needs to become much more sophisticated, and that's an issue.
In the speech you mentioning that there is a problem of the Western are saying as the Sanskrit is a dead language. If you are going to try to give an answer for that question, it is like no use, because practically it happened. It's already dead, and there is no use for that. If in Kannada there is a gade, jatti kalagade bidru meese mannaglilla, means we have already lost. We are giving the reasons, but there is no use.
Okay, so you read my book. I have a chapter on is Sanskrit dead or alive, and I give you many answers to that. I don't know, it will take a while, but I have, I'm convinced that it is not a dead language. No, because a language is not just how to order a cup of chai and order taxi. The mantra, the meditation, the philosophy, the use of non-translatables in other languages, they're all alive. So it is not that if I'm not going around talking every day Vyavharika stuff in Sanskrit, therefore language is dead. The language has got many levels of language. It is not just Vaikhari. It is also Madhyam, Pasyanti, Para. It is also a language much deeper than ordinary talk. So it may have in the ordinary talk got very tiny share of people using it, but its deeper layers are still active in our way of thinking. It's active in our architecture. It's active in the dance. So Sanskrit and Sanskriti are intertwined, and one is alive, the other is alive. They keep each other alive. So to say Sanskrit is dead would mean Sanskriti is dead, because the Sanskrit is encoded into the Sanskriti so deeply that as long as the Sanskriti is alive, the Sanskrit is the deep DNA. It's the structure of the Sanskriti.
Pranam Rajagiri, my name is Anup. My question is, since we have gathered in a prestigious University of Sanskrit, as an outsider, I live in outside India. I want to pursue my learnings in Sanskrit. What is the best platform? I don't see any distance education in Sanskrit from India.
Very good point.
Are you staying here?
No, I stay in Singapore. So I really want to learn Sanskrit. What is it I can do?
Then maybe they'll talk to you later.
I'm Dr. Aarti, Namaste sir. You just used the word Sanskrit non-translatables. My question is based on that. As a Sanskrit teacher myself, and I profusely interact with youth, many times the question that comes to me is the word vada, the word charcha, they are badly understood. people are completely confused about what is a debate and what is an argument. So such problems I always see. And for example, when a Westerner or an outsider approaches India, that is mistaken to be appreciation. I think I shared one of my experiences with you. Once I had gone to Madurai, I saw a bunch of foreigners in the temple going around in Indian dress. I was also quite happy, but I had read Rajiv Malhotra ji. So then I was observing where they go. They came outside, and there was a bunch of nuns there, Christian nuns, who took them to a nearby hotel, gave them a questionnaire and made them write down. So I understood the whole drama. So at least some youth like us are fortunate enough to be in contact with you. But I'll come directly to the question. So what happens is the word vada is always misunderstood. The word dharma is misunderstood. Shraddha is misunderstood. And mata, abhimata and mata are misunderstood as some very assertive phonetic school. So maybe we are also confused about that because we are so attached to our mata, our other cults, you know, we don't have a bigger picture. So my request, I'd like to request in your presence, because there are so many Sanskrit scholars here, I'm also a Sanskrit teacher and student, can we form a database where a very standardized understanding of these words is formed? That's very important.
Sanskrit non-translatable is one of the most important areas of my interest. So my experience of Sanskrit is primarily discovering more and more deeper experiences of certain non-translatables. Like, what does it mean in my life? How do I experience it? Because it's not just an intellectual thing. And I firmly believe that if we can explain to people, let's say we start with 108 non-translatables to keep it manageable, and we make it part of every child's vocabulary, even if he speaks English. He can speak English, but he will say Shraddha, he will say Atman and not soul, he will say Dharma and not religion, and he will know the difference. He will know how to argue and say, no, this is the difference. If you say soul animals don't have, plants don't have, which Atma, okay? And for a long time, the church believed that blacks don't have a soul. And there was also a debate on whether women have a soul. You know that? In the church, there was a debate. A long time ago, there was a debate, people asking, you know. So, and soul doesn't reincarnate. You know, the idea of the whole relationship of soul to God is not the same because there's dualism. So you can take every one of these non-translatables. In my book, Being Different, I've done one chapter on non-translatables. And I've explained only 20 of them. But that project, if you want to start, I would love to be part of it. We should create one of my books that I'll never probably live long enough to write, but one of the books I started writing is 108 non-translatables. Maybe we can do it together. And once we develop this 108, then the idea is that we teach, you know, every week you teach 2 of them. So in a year you get through most of them. And so every child should learn this, and no matter what language he's using, because each Sanskrit non-translatable word is a whole ecosystem. It brings with it many other things. To understand that, you have to bring in something. You have to bring in something. And as long as you're using that word, gradually you'll begin to learn more and more things also about Sanskrit and Sanskriti. So starting with 108 is very, very powerful. And it can be done. The 108 non-translatable project is a very powerful project. And I hope one of the collaborations we can do is something like that.
University, it has more weightage, and whatever we do, these little books, we have to go around selling people. So if it gets a university acknowledgement, if such a database is standardized and published through a university with some big names who write forwards for that, and if it is standardized where no Trimata Bheda or other Bhedas headaches come into, and that is very, very important, sir, because in field I see the necessity so for our own students more than foreigners.
One thing I can tell you, if I were doing this book, I would get it published by a very prestigious press and make it into an international thing. I'll go around, give talks, lectures like I'm doing with this book. So if I were to get a co-author, 1 or 2 who want to work with me on this, if the book is a good book, we will make sure it gets recognized. So I need help because there's only so much I can do and I have too many projects going on. So if you want, contact me.
One small remark with regard to this. In fact, I tried to translate several Sanskrit words, particularly words in philosophy, into English. It is almost impossible to tell you honestly. So what we are expected to do is give the concept it represents. So it requires nearly one paragraph explanation or something. In that way, the Sanskrit words we have to interpret it in English, otherwise nobody will take it. Particularly when you are actually arguing with the Westerners, you have to tell something in English only. So what you are expected to do is, this is the concept represented by this particular word. There cannot be one-to-one correspondence in translation. This is my suggestion.
Well, certain words like yoga, you just introduce the word and make sure it does not get distorted. By actively introducing a word which has no substitute, and every attempt to substitute we keep negating and saying that doesn't get it, you don't get it, you don't get my meaning. The moment you say religion, you don't get it, it's not the same thing. Over a period of time, if our people are assertive, it will become a global word. So that is what we have to do. You start with empowering our own people with a good new vocabulary, and then it will spread from there.
Sir, before closing, so I would like to, I'm reminded of something which is very important in this context of non-translatability of Sanskrit terms. As you pointed out, we should encourage the teaching of Sanskrit in the medium of Sanskrit. So this is very important. Otherwise, now people are thinking that who teach in Sanskrit, who learn Sanskrit in the Sanskrit medium, think that we are second grade teachers and second grade, students. So, yeah, the domination of English is also a problem for Sanskrit. Yes. So how to really get rid of this problem. So at the same time, last 7 years, we have been working in a big way by establishing an email list called Bharatiya Vidvat Parishad. It is purely Swadeshi Indology list, where we have around 1,800 scholars working, actively participating in the list.
But how come you never made me member?
Yeah, that's what in this gathering, we are overwhelmed and we welcome you to our list.
Do it today.
Yeah, thank you very much. So,
Sent? Okay.
So now I request our Vice Chancellor to give her remarks.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಈಗ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಸಮಯ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಟೇಕ್ ಫ್ಯೂ ಮಿನಿಟ್ಸ್. ಈಗ ರಾಜೀವ್ ಮಲ್ಹೋತ್ರಾ ಅವರ ಭಾಷಣವನ್ನು ನೀವು ಕೇಳಿದ್ದೀರಿ. he was spoke very nicely. It was very informative and thought provoking. This speech enlightens research students and scholars how to deal with philosophical perspective. On behalf of our university, we are very much thankful to Rajiv Malhotra ji. Today we are conducting Vivekananda Jayanti also. He said 8 sutras. I will tell you that sutras. It is never late. One is, it is never late. Live simple, love people, expect little, work more, think positive, smile always, because it gives charm. Don't argue or don't angry. If you following these 8 sutras, you may get, or we may get, good mind, good health, and wealth also, and we create a good society. Thank you.
Just next.
शुभ मध्याह्नं सर्वेभ्यः नमस्कारः. नवदेहलीस्थ राष्ट्रीयसंस्कृतसंस्थानेन समायोजिताः 54तम अखिलभारतीयशास्त्रीयस्पर्धाः तिरुपतिस्थ श्री वेंकटेश्वर संस्कृतविश्वविद्यालये प्रादुर्जायन्त. तासु स्पर्धासु 16 राज्येभ्यः 500 छात्राः समायाताः. कर्नाटकराज्यात् 39 छात्राः भागमवहन्. 10 स्वर्णपदकैः 10 रजतपदकैः 3 कांस्यपदकैः छात्राः पुरस्कृत्य राजन्ते. तत्र 200 अधिकान् अंकान् संप्राप्य अयं गणः वैजयन्ती पुरस्कारेण सभाजितः। अत्र 35 संवत्सरेभ्यः वैजयन्ती पुरस्कारेण सुशोभते इदं कर्णाटकराज्यम्। एते अत्र हेतुभूताः एते युवानः उत्साहपूर्णाश्छात्राः ते अत्र अभिनन्द्यन्ते। अहं क्रमशः पट्टिकां पठामि। एकैकछात्रोऽपि आगत्य पुष्पगुच्छं राङ्कवञ्च स्वीकुर्वन्तु इति सम्प्रार्थये। गण्यान् प्रार्थये छात्रान् सम्मानयन्तु इति। साहित्य भाषणे एवं समस्यापूर्ते स्पर्धायां च प्रथम पुरस्कारम् एवं द्वितीय पुरस्कारं च प्राप्तवान् अस्ति सूर्य हेब्बार्। राष्ट्रीय संस्कृत संस्थानं राजीव गांधी परिसरः शृंगगिरि। एवं सांख्य भाषणे तृतीय पुरस्कारं प्राप्तवान् अस्ति मृत्युंजय शास्त्री SMSP संस्कृत महाविद्यालयः उडुपि। मीमांसा भाषण स्पर्धायां मंजुनाथ भट्टः राष्ट्रीय संस्कृत संस्थानं राजीव गांधी परिसरः शृंगगिरि। ज्योतिष भाषणे नागपति हेगड़े राष्ट्रीय संस्कृत संस्थानं राजीव गांधी परिसरः शृंगगिरि। जैन बौद्ध दर्शन भाषणे गिरिराज उपाध्यायः SMSP संस्कृत महाविद्यालयः उडुपि। मीमांसा शलाका भाषणे द्वितीय पुरस्कारः SM प्रणवः पूर्णप्रज्ञा विद्यापीठं बेंगलुरु। श्रीमद्भगवद्गीता कंठपाठ स्पर्धायां तृतीय पुरस्कारं प्राप्तवान् अस्ति आत्मा रामः वेद विज्ञान गुरुकुलं चन्नेनहಳ್ಳಿ। ऋग्वेद इदानीं श्रीमद्भगवद्गीता कंठपाठ स्पर्धायां तृतीय पुरस्कारः प्राप्तवान् अस्ति आत्मारामः वेद विज्ञान गुरुकुलं चन्नेनहಳ್ಳಿ। ऋग्वेद पदपाठः प्रथम पुरस्कारम् एवं अन्त्याक्षर्यां द्वितीय पुरस्कारं च प्राप्तवान् अस्ति हरिकेशः श्री राजराजेश्वरी संस्कृत महापाठशाला स्वर्णवल्ली। शुक्ल यजुर्वेद पदपाठे प्रथम पुरस्कारं प्राप्तवान् अस्ति आनंद जोशी श्री जयेन्द्र सरस्वती गुरुकुलं हुब्बಳ್ಳಿ। वेदान्त्याक्षरी स्पर्धायां प्रथम पुरस्कारम् एवं पदपाठे च प्राप्तवान् अस्ति अक्षय भट्टः श्री राजराजेश्वरी संस्कृत महापाठशाला स्वर्णवल्ली। एते छात्राः अत्र अभिनन्द्यन्ते। धन्यवादाः। अहं धन्यवादः क्षन्तव्यं संस्कृत विश्वविद्यालयस्य शोधछात्रः अत्र प्रथम पुरस्कारं प्राप्तवान् अस्ति शास्त्रार्थगोष्ठ्यां शंभुनाथ महाभागः।
So before closing, so I would like to give my remarks on this battle for Sanskrit. This book, Battle for Sanskrit, is all about a war for intellectual independence that must take place in Indian minds, not in Western sides. So to create and chart a new path of independent thinking. Until now, many insider thinkers were fighting to carve out a space for traditional views and culture. Despite of many dialogues, Sanskrit had not been considered as a central point of the debate. For the first time, a dialogue has started where Sanskrit has not only been found to be living, but has become the central point in the entire debate. For many decades now, an outsider team has projected Sanskrit as being dead, not relevant to today's world, while at the same time demonizing the Sanskrit tradition and using it for political ends, which started ruling Indian minds. So Rajiv Malhotra ji has taken a challenge to a hegemonical Eurocentric academia to provide room for traditional views, and has also brought this issue to the attention of the larger society. So this book will undoubtedly be an important turning point in the struggle against entrenched power centers that undermine Sanskrit and Indian traditions. This book greatly boosts the intellectual support that traditional scholarship needs to overcome the imposition of Eurocentric agenda on Indian history and culture. Moreover, I personally believe that this book is a must-read holy book for Sanskrit fraternity. Thank you very much.
सर्वेभ्यः नमः. Karnataka Sanskrit University. It is only Thanksgiving, but I would like to give a few remarks about the Sri Raju Malhotra and our effort of battle with the American Indology. First, Karnataka Sanskrit University, which is in forefront of war against the Western Indology, by actively having a course of history of Indology, we congratulate and thank Sri Raju Malhotra ji, who in spite of his busy schedule found time to address our students and faculty as well. I thank our Vice Chancellor for facilitating arrangement of the seminar, and I thank all the people who have gathered here, students and all the public. I would like to make few remarks about Raju Malhotra. In the third phase of Indology, that what I have written a very big article on third phase of Indology. It is from the 1991. The third phase of Indology has begun. In this phase, Sri Raju Malhotra ji has taken this battle against the American Indology, and not only against the American Indology, but the Western Indology to their own court. That is the first thing that has happened. There are so many people, they are waging war, but it is the first time an Indian has taken this war to their own court. Because of Raju Malhotra ji's battles, Western Indology has been feeling crumbling. It is virtually crumbling. All the leading figures of the Western Indology, they are feeling threatened. They are feeling very sad because of the attacks of Sri Raju Malhotra ji. Since I am one of the members of the Western Indology list for the last 15 years, I have been witnessing the gradual change that is happening in the Western Indology. Dominic Ujastik, John Huben, Robert Jaidambos, Jesse Knudsen, Andy Actry, etc. These people, they are feeling threatened by the works of Sri Raju Malhotra ji. Only yesterday, one person, Patrick McCartney, has asked, what about the new book of Raju Malhotra? Has anybody read this book, Battle for Sanskrit? Now again debate will start. This is the situation of Western Indology because of the efforts taken by Sri Raju Malhotra ji. However, I feel it is our duty to think about our own situation. It is highly important to note that scholars and public, that it is us who are helping the Western academia in achieving its own goal. We are helping them rather than those people who are helping. The problem is the Indian Sanskrit scholars, they have failed the nation. This is my sad opinion. However, it may feel very terrible to other people, but Sanskrit scholars have failed the nation. We need not blame anybody. Not all. That is certainly, that is in all cases, sapavadaha niyamaha. All the Sanskrit scholars, Sanskrit professors are ignorant of the Western designs. The top level leaderships of the Sanskrit universities, they have failed. they are totally ignorant of this design. It has failed to bring in standards in the academics of the Sanskrit universities. This is the situation. If Western academia is achieving its goal, it is because of the falling standards of Indian academics. We need to bring very high standards to the Indian academia, Indian Sanskrit scholarship, then only we can defeat the Western designs. So we should change. Academics should get prominence rather than the what I call chamchagiri. So I hope we need to bring very high change in the Indian academia, Sanskrit scholarship. So we will be able to defeat the Western designs. For this thing, our BVP is working for the last 7 years. Very vast group. By hope, but I hope that thousands more are to join us. It should comprise of something on 10,000 people's group. Then only we can hope that there will be some change. And I hope everybody who are sitting here, they should subscribe to the Western Indology list to know the designs of the Western Indology. They should subscribe to the both BVP and also Western Indology. You just Google Western Indology list, that is operated by Dominic Wojcik, etc. You will get the, I hope later we will show it on the screen. And I thank Sri Raju Malhotra ji, and I finish with the Ghoshawakya of BVP. Athachet tvamimam dharmyam sangramam nakarishyasi tvata swadharmam kirtincha hitva papamavapsyasi. Then nirashir niramo bhutva yudhyasva yugatajvara. This is the if we don't wage the battle against American people, then tada swadharmam kirtincha hitva papamavapsyasi. It is the message given by the Gita. So I hope everybody will join us in our battle against the American Indology, and I hope Sri Raju Malhotra ji will also join us in the next thing. Thanks to everybody for participating in this workshop. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to join your group. I'm very happy that you appreciate the fight I'm doing, but I also get fired at by the enemy. So I want your help also. So I want, this book will start another round of firing against me. So you can't just sit aside and watch the game and fun, you know, oh, usko maar diya or laga diya, like some Bollywood movie.
No, sir, we are already in your defense. I have written one very big article on you, but it is still not published. I gave it to Vinay Chandra and also Professor Varkhede.
But you know what you have to do is,
it will be published in the American journals, I hope. That's why we are waiting for.
So what you have to do is also, when the firing starts, we can't just run away. We have to then give our arguments, because this issue of, you know, is Ramayana atrocious or not, all the points I'm raising, it is, those points should become, they are battle fronts.
Yes.
And we have to protect our fronts.
Yes. And I have defended all the 7 cases of plagiarism against you. These are all the not cases of plagiarism. That's what I wanted to try in that article. I will send it to you also. And
sir,
now we will finish
this.
And after that we will have one closed door meeting with Sri Malhotra ji. After that.
Not only you should hold your fort, you should also be offensive. That's my feeling. I'm always offensive. I need others.
The whole Sanskrit scholarship is with Sri Raju Malhotra ji. We will support. He is the only person who has taken the battle into their own court. Since he is living in America and he has good connection with the people world over, he is the ablest person to fight. He'll take the lead, and we will support for whatever help we can
Very
do.
good.
We can certainly will give.
But I'm also in the firing line, sitting there.
No. We are there. We
Yeah.
are there.
Good.
We had discussed this in the Indology group.
Good.
Also in the Bharati Vidyat Parishad. We have signed the petition against the
Yes.
Justin Son, who has a petition for
Right.
withdrawal of your book.
Right.
We will do it in every occasion.
Very
we will,
good. See, now we
do
have,
all, we will give all the help.
Now we have video proof also.
Certainly. Why not? Just you Google about our efforts in the Bharati Vidyat Parishad. Whatever discussion has been taken, you can also Google about the Indology archive. It is recorded in the Indology archive that such and such person has written against the Justin Hudson or Robert J. Bose or John Huben, that everybody will be able to find. So.
With Shantri Mantra, this Sabha will be closed, and we have a small meeting with Raju Malhotra ji, a strategic meeting. So, anything?
I will show the Indology list.
Later we can do it.
No.
Sir, time is up. Sir, it's disconnected, sir. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ओम शांति शांति शांतिः।
सर्वे चाय पानार्थमपि आहूयन्ते। तत् इदानीं प्रारब्धं नास्ति।
तथापि वक्तव्यमस्ति। कोटि